Thank you again for having us here, and we are going to actually start with a land acknowledgement. So if everyone can stand up. We do this to honor the place where we are, do we need the house lights? Can we get the house lights up? And we do this every year so that we acknowledge where we are and who we're with. So we take this time honoring the land where we are today, the ocean that surrounds us, the sky, the stars, and most importantly, the people who are here hosting us and how they've been stewards of this land. To elders past, present, and emerging, we acknowledge and we honor you. And I have an indigenous leader in South Africa, Dr. Chabalala, who also reminds me that we have to acknowledge in the room that it's not by accident that we're all here, and that when you tell your stories, when you share the sacredness of your lived experience, that you ask the permission of the eldest person in the room and the youngest person. So I'm going to ask if there's anyone over 100 years old who's here with us today. You never know. Anyone? Anyone over 90? Anyone over 80? Wow, over 70. Okay. I'll let you decide who's the oldest in the 70s. Who, 78? 77? 76? Yeah? Thank you. So we honor your lived experience because in this room, you have experienced the planet and this earth longer than the rest of us, and you've had the longest lived experience. So we honor the time you've had here, and we hope to learn from you. Do we have your permission to share our stories today? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. And for the youngest, is there anyone here under 10? Under 15? Under 10? Hi. How old are you? 8? Thank you for being here. We look forward to your future and how exciting for you to be with us today. So we asked you, do we have your permission to share our stories today? Thank you. Okay, you can be seated. So I want to thank you all and thank Inish Tech for having us back. In fact, a lot of our team are in the Explorers Club, so you're going to be hearing our stories about what we do on the Earth, how we work together. And my story is a little bit different. I came into research with the team through Humanitarian past, and so I'm going to share some stories with you today of the work I've done around the world. In fact, we thought about the evening after the afternoon sessions, and that story will continue in my stories and what that means for space, exploration, and for the future of who we are. So I am first a humanitarian, I'm also a conflict mitigation agent, and I'm also a researcher. And so like a lot of the explorers here, a lot of those multitudes exist in our life and at different times in our life. But I'll start with telling you first where I'm from. Many of you already know or know of El Paso, Texas. This is the corner of New Mexico, Texas, and the country of Mexico. And I grew up on this border in a place that was already being defined by NASA for training of astronauts, military. It's home now as a space hub to many of the commercial space flight spaceports. White Sands also continues to be, you'll see there on the slide, a place for training. But it's also a border city. This is Juarez, Mexico in the second picture. And I'm actually standing in El Paso taking that picture. So it's a kind of a blended culture, multicultural, multilingual, and I grew up in this. And the third one I had to show you is the beauty of the desert, because it is a mountainous desert area. And there's a lot of geological history. The university has the deepest geological history in the US, or one of, and happens to be one of the leading aerospace engineering universities, and is host to one of the Artemis trainers who does the geological training for the new generation of astronauts. And that's me when I was like 5 years old, on the right. And I show you because within this context, I grew up below the poverty line. Scarce resources, large family, big community, but also within gang violence. And this border culture also brought in heavy violence growing up. It was normal to have drive-by shootings. And in that context, I believe it was a miracle that our parents kept us dreaming. And they never squashed our creativity. And so I wanted to be an astronaut. But I also didn't want to be in the military, and I didn't want to be a fighter pilot. And so I thought, what else can I do that can give back to humanity? I can travel the world, I can work with people, and maybe I can save lives. And I decided to be a humanitarian. And it happened by intention. I wanted to see what I could do to give back. So I'll start with a few countries. I'm just giving you examples of where I've worked. And the lessons it gave me as I went and kind of crossed over into space. So my first major deployment was to Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo. We talk about protracted war. I mean, Aziz was talking about how this has been forever for this war. You talk about that, but it's really protracted conflict, protracted tension. And when I arrived, I was really thwarted into therapeutic feeding centers, return refugees, active combat, first time being held at gunpoint. It was just this massive learning and experience. But the one thing that I left with was a severely deep impact from an encounter with a child soldier. And I don't know has anyone ever encountered a child soldier? I thought. It's one of the most traumatic experiences because you are experiencing someone that looks so hollow. And you can't believe that a 9-year-old is holding up a Kalashnikov to your face. And what they had trained me to do did not take place in real life. I was frozen, but I had a negotiator, and I realized quickly within what happened that there is no negotiating with a child soldier. And they wanted bubblegum, condoms, and cigarettes. And I don't know how we got out of that situation, but I was left really deeply feeling how intensely malleable we are as humans, how easily we can be taught, convinced, and really follow a whole belief system, especially before we have deductive reasoning. And that stayed with me when I left. And it stays with me to this day that that's even a possibility in this world. I ended up going to Somalia years later, and I was the first female director to go in. And when I got there, the community was working on what we call biosecurity program, which was a veterinary program with women and men working with camels and giving them alternative livelihoods. So what I ended up doing was working with communities that were in the middle of this desert. And I grew up in the desert, but when I got to this desert, it was something completely different. And in every direction, there was nothing. And I thought, how can a people survive with this limited resources? I don't see water, I don't see agricultural land. And so the beauty in this moment for me was working with these elder women. All their food was imported from Ethiopia, and they were happily providing for an entire community with what little pulses and grains they were receiving. And so they were teaching me here how to make something spread and last for at least, families of 6 to 7 and a whole village. And I thought how immense it is to share such scarce resources with each other as humans. Years later, I went to northern Uganda, Gulu, which I returned to many, many times. And Uganda is unique because here I learned something very valuable about people and policies. No matter what we plan for, we have a human innateness to find a loophole. The reason I was here was because the central government, the health ministry, had decentralized and wanted to incentivize all of their health clinics to do better to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. And so what they did was, we will give you bigger budget if you lower all your rates of death. Maternal mortality was the number one. And this place where I'm at now in Gulu was coming in first place every quarter. And at one point they were 0% maternal mortality rate, which was impossible. We came to find out there was a loophole. You didn't have to report death in the clinic. That went on the registry. So they were sending women home to die. So they never had to count those. So in fact, we came in and we were conducting focus groups. So this is me with the young men who were the decision makers on how to improve health in the area, understand really systemically why this driver didn't work. And I thought, if we plan communities in the future, or when you think about people coming together around a policy framework, do we really incentivize towards the right common and greater goal, or will we always find a way to loophole and not really understand the detriment to our community? That took a decade to undo. And this is the most recent response I did, which was in Bahamas. So Hurricane Dorian in 2019. I was a first responder, and this what you're going to see was 2 days after the water receded. And this community had no one come out. We had kind of been surveying from helicopter, and we didn't think there were any survivors. And this day we landed, and there were 12 survivors. And when we arrived, we brought a limited amount of supplies that we thought in case somebody was there. So a boat arrived after our helicopter. And basically, we had generators, food, water, clothing. But the only thing they wanted, one, they could not stop hugging us because they couldn't believe somebody came to this little island. And the second thing, they just wanted our phone to call their families. They wanted to be connected. They wanted their family to know they were alive. And I remember just being really struck that they didn't care about the medication or the food. They wanted to hear the voices of their family. And when they were asked on the news why they didn't leave, like, why didn't you evacuate? And their answer was, we will never leave our home. We will never leave our land. So it took me 2 decades questioning how we were doing this work. And I mean, I was in like 59 conflicts and, traveling on all continents, and it was, what does this all mean, and why am I doing this, and is there more? Can I do more with what I'm doing? And I interviewed a lot of friends in different sectors, and I said, look, this is what I've been doing, but I really want to do more. I don't know what it is, but I feel like I'm not doing the right thing right now. There has to be a better way. And when I talked to my friends that were doing 3D printing for my health centers and now doing 3D printing and putting on the ISS, they said, why don't you look at space exploration? And I was so taken that there was a time to return to my childhood dream and work on space. And so I first started working with an institute to learn what was happening in space. And so I started learning about human spaceflight. What were we doing? When were we going? Who was going? And how were they going? And so I got trained as a spacesuit technician, doing pretty much, it's an alignment with what current NASA astronauts are training. We're kind of doing the survival training, and then also carrying out the geological Artemis type research. So I understood like fully what are we going to try and do on another planet. So this was the first time I was actually exposed to geological planetary geology out in the field. This is the Apollo site, where the Apollo astronauts were trained, and where today, you'll hear later from Tess Caswell, where the Artemis astronauts are training. And this is where I met Anna Putish, who is the reason that I ended up in this cave here on this island in November. She'll tell you more about this, but it was great to know that I could bring together my human health background, survival background, my understanding of the human behavior in these really extreme contexts, to work with geoscience. And also, I was really lucky to be joining space medical research and sending our research to suborbit and to orbit. So last year, we sent this biomonitor, which I'm the PI on, for a Virgin flight we did. And last year, with Axiom 2, we were also, me and my team, were able to send research up to the ISS with the Saudi team of astronauts. And we are excited on both flights to be coming out with publications very, very soon to share with everyone about our findings. And through the Explorers Club, I was also able to look at my climate research, which I had also learned through the Institute. What else can we do with space technology that can help us on Earth? And so I was learning for a few years, how do we take remote sensing, polar suborbital observations, which is what I'm doing here for noctilucent clouds, and how do we use that carbon and methane tracking to actually work with NASA, and how to do predictive models for agriculture? How do we have agriculture prepared for flooding? How do we look at migration of people? How do we look at wildfires and mitigation of wildfire? So a whole onslaught of what are these other humanitarian aspects and applications of climate that actually are leading to climate disasters. And I was also very lucky I always say I'm lucky because I feel very grateful for the privilege to do this. But in fact, going to the Arctic and also to Tromsø in Sweden, we were doing solar science, also looking at observations, astrophotography, and looking at the geomagnetic force of the sun, and how does that impact climate, and what do we know about the changing nature of the atmosphere? So I did all this, and I want to show you a video. And I am showing you this video because I knew I could do this arc of humanitarian work, which I still do, but I really wanted to take the space application of medical work, of research, of climate, and how do I take that back to my humanitarian settings? How do we design better for people? How do we design better with people? And I think this video surprised me when I saw it, because it was my first time seeing an aurora. But I remember my first reaction was actually, I can still be surprised by the Earth. And so I'll show you.
Hey, Jeff.
Look!
Yep.
Oh, I can't even pay attention. Okay. Oh.
Yep, that's an expansion.
Oh my God! Look at that! Oh, it's everywhere! Oh my God! It's like dancing on them. Oh! Okay, so there was a lot of shock, but I don't remember this moment. I remember what I saw. But this team was extremely opening and welcoming to having me and my team up to do this work. And what I took from that was, I'm so glad and I'm so grateful that even with everything I've witnessed, everything I've seen, that I can still find wonder and beauty on this planet, and I still have hope. And I still believe that we can do that together, and I can't wait to continue to take what I've done, the research, and apply it. But I think the bigger questions that it gave me was, on this planet, how do I continue to work with people? How do I continue to give back in a way now that I have even more access to remote technologies and space, and how do we put that together? And the work that I do consulting with space agencies, it's to do that, to roadmap. What does science and technology look like for people? What does it look like for human spaceflight? Have we considered the impact it's going to have on the world? Are we really thinking back about humanity? All those stories I shared and many more really make me think about the people and their unfolding history. I mean, I saw it in person, I lived it with them, and what that means for the history of the planet, even the history of their ancestors. And the question that I still have is, how do we reconcile being human? How do we reconcile the stories we heard earlier from our distinguished guests? And when you think about spaceflight, and we're going to hear stories about these women who are working on the future of exploration, who are we going to be? How are we going to take these lessons? Are we going to harness them? And certainly for the future, can we carry our human history and cast a new blueprint for who we will be? Thank you.